Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. This is where we take a look at the big events, reports and releases coming up this week that give insight into the economy and a look back at what happened last week too. I'm Sean Aylmer, and every Monday I'm joined for the week ahead by economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekouk.com, THEKOUK.com, and on Twitter using the handle thekouk. Stephen, good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Well, what a week last week was. You must have had a great time. We had, business confidence, consumer sentiment, we had employment figures, and we had the Reserve Bank on climate change. Crazy week.
There was a lot to digest, and on balance, there was a hint of optimism coming through in the data. Now, we know the labour force numbers were very weak. Employment fell sharply. The unemployment rate stayed at basically 4.5%. It was 4.6%. But again, there's lots of quirks in the sharp drop in the participation rate and all these other things. So in a sense, it's just about impossible to read those numbers other than to say the hours worked edged up in the month. And of course, these figures were for the month of September when over half of the country was in severe lockdown, so you wouldn't expect them to be stronger. But then what made my reading of the economy just a little more optimistic was the fact that consumer sentiment was reasonably firm. Again, we're not euphoric, but generally, given the lockdowns are starting to end, there's some optimism there. And arguably the most important number for me last week was the NAB Business Conditions Survey, where we had this big divergence. Business conditions actual were pretty soft, not horrendous, but pretty soft. But the expectations, which of course is what business are thinking about the future, were very buoyant. So it says to me that when these lockdowns continue to be wound back across the eastern states and perhaps some of the interstate borders reopen, we've got a lot of optimism, a lot of pent-up demand that's got to be satisfied.
What about Guy Debelle, the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor? He came out and was quite strident on his views, and he has held these views for a while. But given the timing of his speech about climate change and the need to do something now, otherwise we'll have to do something far more drastic in the future, kind of quite a commentary from the bank.
It was, and some people have been, well, in my view, a little unkind that sort of saying, well, the RBA doesn't have a remit over climate change, so why is it commenting? But my view is that when they're managing economic conditions and financial risk, and as Guy Debelle pointed out in his speech, that there are risks for corporate Australia and for the Australian economy if we are subjected to the downsides of climate change, that there's going to be implications for investment into perhaps renewable energies or the existing dinosaur companies, if we can call them that. And that does fit into the RBA's remit about how they manage that financial stability, risks to the economy. So in a sense, he was saying, we need to get our act together, if you like, and that unless we do, we are subject to sort of more volatility, a potential capital strike, I think I might have used the wrong word there, but that's something to that effect that, if we are seen as the pariahs of the global economy, then in a world of globalised capital markets, we might just miss out on some of that much-needed investment. So, again, it's not this sort of issue that's going to cause the economy to be strong or weak next week or next quarter or even next year, but it's something that he's flagging as a sort of a long-term structural issue for the RBA to look at.
Well, that's last week. We'll be back in a moment to get into the week ahead. I'm with economist Stephen Koukoulas, aka The Kouk. Stephen, there's not a lot of data out this week, but I did want to ask you about the lockdowns. Now, New South Wales, further restrictions from today. Premier Daniel Andrews is still pushing for Victoria to reopen as soon as possible, notwithstanding the number of cases there. And the ACT, of course, has lifted some of its restrictions. That whole feel of confidence, how important is that in the economy?
Oh, it's vital. And I think this lockdown ending month, I suppose we could call it. And again, there's different restrictions and there's local government areas in different states, and the ACT are going to be confronting slightly different restriction changes, if I can call it that. But basically what I'm reading of the announcements, they're coming out thick and fast on Friday, on the weekend. There's these new announcements coming about how the lockdown ending will unfold. But suffice to say, my reading of it suggests that come certainly the 1st of November, but then the 1st of December, so not that far away, we will be pretty much open for business. Shops will be opened. A lot of the interstate borders, not all of them, but a lot of them will be open so domestic travel can resume. The hospitality sector is going to be bouncing back. Crowds will be allowed to go to movie theatres, sporting events. Something dear to my heart, as you know. The racing industry is going to have a few crowds at them. And so we're going to be getting back to this normal. And from what we know about how the consumer, the household sector is positioned, they've got a lot of cash. They've saved a lot of money during the lockdowns. They've saved a lot of money from mortgage interest rates being where they are. So we've got this pent-up demand, and you just, in a sense, have to look at the queues that were there at some of the department stores, at hairdressers, and I think it was even beauty salons, that people have got money to spend. They want to spend it. So again, it just feeds into this tone that lockdowns ending is good for the economy and good for the economic recovery.
Yeah. The RBA minutes, of course, are out. Do you expect anything in that you didn't know already?
No, RBA minutes will be pretty much a straight bat. They're looking at the end of the lockdown too. So in a sense, I'll say there's nothing there other than perhaps a cursory comment on the housing market and that restriction that we saw from APRA a few weeks ago on the lending criteria.
Have a great week, Stephen.
Thank you, Sean. All the best to you.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kouk. You can find him at thekouk.com and follow him on Twitter using the handle The Kouk. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.